So we really do want to save the butterflies. Butterflies do matter to us. And Tim is really going to get more deep into this for you. But in a general term, butterflies are indicative of a healthy environment, sort of like the canary in the coal mine. If there are butterflies, you know you have a fairly healthy ecosystem. They definitely help with pollination and some natural pest control. Again, they're very indicative of a healthy ecosystem. And they're also an important element of the food chain. I mean, unfortunately, they are eaten by other creatures, but that's all part of the food chain in nature. And let's face it, they really are beautiful. There are thousands of butterflies, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen one that you don't think is beautiful, and when you see them on your plants, you're like, wow, look at that. At least I am. So what we're going to do is I'm going to let Tim, the butterfly guy, take you through the life cycle of butterflies, teach you a lot of stuff about butterflies in general, and then after that I'll come back and give you some basics.
So as you guys heard, my name is Tim. I am the outreach coordinator for the Seneca Park Zoo. So basically a lot of my job is talking to people about animals, and actually one of my favorite animals are butterflies. So quick little bits about their background. It is an insect. Sometimes people are very shocked to hear this. They think, oh, I hate bugs, I hate insects, but butterflies, they're so pretty. I like them so much. And then they're like, well, hey, you know, butterflies are actually an insect. I can tell you that it's an insect because, well, of these things. It has a hard exoskeleton. It's got 3 body segments. It has spiracles, which is its breathing apparatus, 6 legs, 3 pairs of jointed legs, compound eyes, antennas, and, well, their life cycle actually show off that they are an insect. So really, right here, you can see this is the anatomy of a butterfly. You have, right there is the forewing. This part right here is the hind wing. It's got the 3 body segments, head, thorax, and abdomen. Compound eye, the antenna, proboscis. We'll talk about the proboscis in just a little bit. And then we have our, it's got the 6 legs. So also just so you can see, just kind of a top-down view, and you can see some of the different ways how it is, the 3 body segments. But one of the things I do want to kind of key into you right now is this right here. This is the close-up of what the butterfly wing looks like. It kind of looks like the shingles on a roof, basically. We're going to get to that in just a second. So as I said, it is an insect. It's in a group called Lepidoptera, which is butterflies and moths. Lepis is scale, pteron is wing. So what I just said a couple of moments ago, it looks like if you look really closely at the wings of a butterfly, it looks like the shingling on a roof. Well, those are the scales that make up that scaly wing. They have that proboscis, and there's a couple of odd things. Now, by the way, sorry, proboscis is a drinking straw. It's their mouth. It's how they drink the nectar that comes out of the plants, and that is as an adult. They do have some really odd things, and I love these odd things. Their sense of smell is through their antenna. So those antennas right on the top of their head, they're smelling everything. They're the chemoreceptors for smelling. Their sense of taste, I absolutely love this one, is by their feet. Their hearing is with their knees. But so they have some really kind of odd things, but this just makes them just kind of a more wonderful animal, I think. So kind of back to this, that they are in a group called Lepidoptera, it's your butterflies and moths. It's the second largest group of similar organisms in the world. The only one that's bigger is the beetles. There's 165,000 species of butterflies and moths out there. 165,000. But it's not evenly distributed between butterflies and moths. We'll talk about that in a second. So really quickly, here's their taxonomy for them. They're in Animalia, Arthropoda, Insecta, and then Lepidoptera. And it is butterflies and moths. As I said, it's not evenly distributed. We like to key in on butterflies because they're beautiful, but really there's a lot more moths in this world. So really quickly, how do we tell the difference between a butterfly and a moth? Typically, butterflies diurnal or awake during the daytime. Moths are nocturnal. That's pretty simple. We've all seen butterflies during the daytime. We all see moths during the nighttime. Usually you don't see the other one flying at the other time. And to kind of go with this is butterflies typically have bright, beautiful colors. Moths tend to have dull, drab colors. This also makes a lot of sense because usually you're not going to waste a lot of energy producing these bright, beautiful colors if nobody can see you, if you're a moth. If it's dark out, nobody's going to be able to see you. It's better to have dark, dull, drab colors. But that's not always the case. The one on the right is a moth, and the one on the left is a butterfly. So there's other ways that we can tell the difference between the two of them. If you take a look at the antennas. Now remember, the antennas on the butterfly are what they're smelling with. So if you look at a butterfly, they have a clubbed end to it, or they have a hook at the end of it. Whereas typically speaking, more often than not, our moths are going to have these kind of feather dusters. And this also makes a lot of sense. If you are coming out at nighttime, being able to see is probably not going to be your strongest option for sensing what's going on around you, but your sense of smell might. So bigger antennas helps you smell more. So basically, they have big noses, the moths. Another way, chrysalis and cocoon. We've probably heard, if you guys have ever read that Eric Carlisle book, The Hungry, Hungry Caterpillar, you hear, the butterfly goes into the cocoon. No, actually butterflies go into a chrysalis. A chrysalis is a chitinous shell. It's a hard shell, whereas cocoons are kind of a silk covering. A lot of times also cocoons have lots of caterpillars in them, not just one, whereas for a butterfly, it is just one. You can see a couple right there. This is, and we're going to be talking about it just more in a moment, that's Monarch right there. And this is a type of swallowtail. And then we have the cocoon on the other side. Also is, let's take a look at their bodies. So thin, smooth bodies, that tends to be a butterfly. Moths, they tend to have kind of thick, furrier bodies. Once again, makes a lot of sense because they're going to be coming out at nighttime when they need to try to keep as warm as possible. And I think this is lastly, is how they hold their wings. More often than not, butterflies are going to fold their wings up over their head, whereas moths are going to lay their wings out or fold them up against their body. So we have Animalia, they're an animal, they're in the arthropods, the hard-shelled animals, insects, and then Lepidoptera, the scaly wings. Then it gets really, really confusing. It breaks down into this whole mess of something. But ultimately, you get to this clade right here. I'm not even going to try pronouncing that. I'm going to tell you that right now. And, but really, to simplify it, it gets down to this. There are 3 superfamilies, and the 3 superfamilies are these right here. So you have our American moth butterflies. This group was actually considered a moth species until they did genetic testing, and then they started kind of finding out that they're actually more closely related to butterflies than moths. This is a group also that can get easily confused with moths. Skippers are a kind of a short little stocky butterfly, and they're the ones that have the hooked antenna as opposed to a clubbed antenna. But as I said, they're easily confused with moths. But if you really look at them, they have all the descriptive factors of being a butterfly. Then you get into the fun group, the true butterflies, the Papilionidae. And that breaks down into 5 groups. And I'm going to go kind of through the 5 groups right now, but they do cover over 14,000 different species of butterflies. This is probably, by the way, one of my favorite groups, the swallowtail butterflies. I did a thesis on the eastern tiger and the Canadian tiger swallowtail, so I spent years working with these guys, and they're a lot of fun. They're big, beautiful butterflies and very easy to recognize and see in our area. They get the name swallowtail because of that forked tail that you see right there and right there. But what's really neat about these guys is that their larva form, the caterpillar, has something called the osmerdium, and that's that yellowish kind of thing right there on the top of their head. It produces a foul odor to basically ward away predators. So this caterpillar gets scared, it pushes these things up out of its head, and it emits this really bad smell, and pretty much nobody wants to get close to it. They also do something that's kind of interesting. Their chrysalis is mounted upright. So they latch onto a tree, and instead of just hanging from the tree, they hang themselves upside down, basically. Then there you have a group called Pieridae. These are your whites and your yellows. Your yellows are also known as sulfurs. These are also one of these butterflies that we see a lot of times on the roadsides. If you're driving your car down the roads right here, down Atlantic, you see a white butterfly or a yellow butterfly, chances are that's one of these kinds of butterflies. These can sometimes be considered pests. There is a butterfly called the cabbage white. Guess what its caterpillar feeds on? Cabbage. And that's why it can be considered a pest, because their caterpillars can sometimes eat some of our mustard seeds, mustard plants, cabbage plants, and similar. These are gossamer winged butterflies, and they tend, we have a couple of different types that are croppers that are in this area that have this really nice coloration with a little bit of metallic sheen into it. The Metalmarks, I get the name Metalmarks because they look like they have little metal flecks in their wings. But these are really not found in our area. They're only really found in the tropics and in the old world. The brushfoot butterflies. These are really considered your true butterflies. This is the largest group or largest family of butterflies with over 5,700 species that are identified in here. Some of them are tropical, like the blue morpho. That's that blue one that you see right there. But this one is the northern pearlii, and that is a butterfly that we can find right here. And I've actually seen one in a field not too far from here. But what's really great about this group is that the variety of different sizes and shapes and colors that are found in this. All the other ones that we've seen are basically, they kind of look very similar. You've seen one, you see you know what it looks like. These ones, they run a wide range of color, sizes, and shapes. Even though there's all this variety that's out there, all butterflies have the same life cycle. Egg, larva, pupa, adult. This is actually the insect life cycle. Most insects are going to go through this life cycle. We just call it something different for the butterflies. They go from the egg stage to the caterpillar stage to the chrysalis and then become the adult. So their life cycle starts off with the internal fertilization. So we have our two monarchs. They join at the abdomen, and there's an internal fertilization of the eggs. Then the female will go around and lay the eggs. Now, what's really interesting about butterflies is that depending on the species, they have a different, what's called a larval host plant. So this is like the only plant that the butterfly will lay its egg on. For monarch butterflies, it's milkweed. That's the only plant that they are going to lay their egg on. Now, what's also really neat is that for most of these butterflies, they don't lay their eggs in big, giant masses. For the monarch butterfly, the female will lay over 200 eggs, but not all at once, one at a time. So what they do is she lays an egg, she finds another milkweed plant, lays another egg, finds another milkweed plant, lays another egg. Sometimes she'll lay a couple of eggs on one plant. There's a couple of really good reasons for this. One is that there are actually predators out there that are going to be looking for butterfly eggs to eat. And there are also, and that's why, by the way, she lays her eggs typically on the underside of the leaf. It helps minimize what animals can see those eggs. The other reason why this is really important is because even for like herbivores, something comes up and eats that plant leaf, it doesn't know that it's eating a butterfly egg, but she just could have lost all of her eggs if she put all of her eggs on that one leaf. There's another very good reason that she wants to spread it out, and it's because of what comes out of the egg. What comes out of the egg is the caterpillar. Now, the caterpillar goes through a tremendous amount of growth in a very short time period. It goes from when that egg is laid, that egg is no bigger than the head of a pin. Very, very tiny. Very, very, very tiny. And then within 2 weeks, after it has hatched out, and by the way, when it hatches out, it is about the size of a grain of rice, or smaller. In 2 weeks' time, it grows to be about the size of your pinky finger. So it's something about like 1,000 times growth in a 2-week time period. And for them to be able to do that much growing, they need to eat a lot. And if they're eating, and if they're going to be growing that much, they need to eat a lot. And if all of those caterpillars are on one plant, they're going to strip that plant so quickly, and then they're not going to have anywhere else to go. So they need to be able to spread themselves out, so hopefully there will be enough food for the caterpillars to eat. Then after that 14 days or so, the caterpillar will grab onto a tree or something a little sturdy and wrap itself up into its chrysalis. The chrysalis is when it goes through its metamorphosis. So it's going to change from that caterpillar into the adult. Now for the monarch butterflies, from most generations of the monarch butterfly doesn't live longer than 30 days as an adult. But there is a special generation. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. So really quickly, once again, you start off with internal fertilization. They lay the egg. You have the rice-sized caterpillar. It goes through 5 growths called instars, and they become a fully grown caterpillar. They'll grow into that chrysalis, and then they'll come out as the adult butterfly. So when we're talking about butterfly gardens, we have to provide butterfly habitat for the whole life cycle. We have to include everything that it needs to have. Now, as I said, they have this life cycle with lots of steps and lots of stages in it. So there's a couple of things that you have to add in. So it's not just food for one part of its life cycle, it's food for 2 parts of its life cycle. So when you plant a butterfly garden, you have to have food for the larval stage. And as I said, this is each butterfly species has its own plant that it likes to feed off of. And as I said, for monarch butterflies, it is milkweed. It's the only thing. Now, here in our area, we have actually 3 types of milkweed that they will eat off of. Common milkweed, swamp milkweed, and another one called butterfly weed. But they're all in the milkweed family. So you have to have food for the larval stage, but you also have to have the food for the adult stage. Now, when you're planning for the adult stage, something you have to provide is nectar plants, but you have to plan for the whole season. So butterflies in our area start showing up, whether it's monarchs or any other types. It's about May is when they start to come out. The mourning cloak is usually one of the first butterflies that we're going to see, and I'll show you that in just a second. But the mourning cloak comes out in about May, and we still have butterflies in the area right now. In fact, just about 2 weeks ago, I saw a monarch in my own yard. I've talked to a couple of my other coworkers around the zoo, and they've seen butterflies around as well. So you have to make sure that you plan for the whole season, always having a nectar source for the butterfly from May until October. You have to have water in your garden. Now, water is pretty easy. They drink from puddles and off of leaves, but what's really cool is that they do something called puddling. They drink the mud. Nectar is the only thing the adults drink of course, as an adult. And nectar essentially is basically like Kool-Aid with lots of sugar in it. It tastes really good, gives them lots of energy, but it doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. So they drink the mud as their vitamin. But that works for our butterflies. They drink up the water that's in the mud, and that actually brings along with it some of the salts, the minerals, and the nutrients. And this is actually really important because for them to be able to reproduce a lot of butterfly species, they need to have those minerals that are found in that mud. They need to have shelter sources. The shelter sources are going to help protect them from predators and from the weather, and it also will give them a place for the chrysalis to latch onto. That's why a lot of times when we're planting our butterfly gardens, we have things like butterfly bush or like Joe Pye weed, which tends to be bigger and bushier and will live a little bit longer, and they're a little bit more hardy and provide a lot more shelter for the butterflies. Of course, they need to have air or oxygen, and as you put plants in there and there's oxygen around, plants are also going to produce oxygen. That's pretty easy to provide, but it is important to have. And then lastly, we need to have space. And as we create a garden, we're actually just increasing that space. So now, what about winter? Butterflies, as I started describing, are very closely tied to the environment and to the spaces that are around them. And they have very specific temperature ranges and food needs. Now, of course, in an area like ours, we're going to get winter, unfortunately, very, very soon. And it's going to make it very difficult for butterflies to survive because, as I said, they need to have certain temperatures and certain plants out. So there are basically 2 different strategies for being able to survive winter. You can either sleep through it. I know that's the one I would like to do. Or you can run away, or for butterflies, fly away from it. So there's actually 2 ways you can sleep through the winter. There's hibernation, and this is actually what the mourning cloak does. I love this butterfly. As I said, it's one of the first butterflies you're going to see in the springtime. What they do is they sleep through the winter as an adult. They'll get underneath the bark of some tree. If you have especially older shingles on the side of your house or your roof, and they start to kind of peel up, they'll sometimes get in between those spaces. They'll find a hole in a tree, and they will basically hunker down there for the winter time, and they will actually survive fairly well there. And then the first spring morning, where it starts to get just warm enough, it's had enough degree heating days, they'll start to come out and they'll flutter around. And as I said, that's one of the reasons I love this butterfly. You will see this first thing basically in the springtime. There's also another type of way that you can sleep through the winter. This is called dipause, basically where you're overwinter in an immature form. You basically put a pause in your life cycle. And that's actually what our viceroy butterfly does. The viceroy will make this thing that's called a hibernaculum. They basically make a little sleeping bag for themselves. They attach it to a leaf, and they'll get in there, and they'll stay there all winter long. And then, of course, you have migration. Migration happens for a lot of butterflies, but none are better known than the monarch. Basically, migration is leaving one area to find a more suitable area. They have this really great migration pattern. It's a really spectacular story if you haven't heard of it. But our monarchs that are even here in this area, they're going to leave this area, fly all the way down into Mexico. Basically, what they're going to do is they are going to follow the plant line as the plants start to die off for the wintertime. I don't like to make too much jokes about it, but it is kind of like a receding hairline. And they follow this plant line as it's heading south. And they also use something called a sun compass. Basically, they know when they wake up in the morning, if they want to head south, that they have to have the sun on their left wing. And as the sun is setting in the evening, for them to be able to keep going south, they have to have the sun on their right wing. They know that they're able to do this and follow their way all the way down into very special sites in Mexico. It's just about, I think it's either 60 or 100 miles to the west of Mexico City. There's 12 spots in the Mexican mountains where every single monarch butterfly, and just so you guys notice, every single monarch butterfly from the Atlantic seaboard into Canada, along the Rocky coast, Rocky Mountains, are going to funnel their way down into Mexico. So basically, 2/3 of the United States, all of the monarch butterflies are going to funnel down to those 12 little spots in Mexico, where they're all going to congregate together in these huge masses, and they'll stay on the trees and in the mountains in Mexico, and they'll stay there all winter long. And when I mean every butterfly, and on the trees, I really mean it. Those are trees that are just completely covered with those monarchs. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I can tell you about why they choose those spots and some other things, but I would like to try to kind of talk about some other things beforehand. And that is their return trip. So the monarchs that have just left our area, they're going to fly all the way down into Mexico. They're going to hang out in Mexico. Then they're going to start to migrate their way back. And but they're not going to live all the way through that migration. So what happens is we have our monarchs right here. They're flying all the way down into Mexico. So this is one generation of monarchs right here. Right at about Halloween, so in the next couple of days or so, somewhere between Halloween and Thanksgiving, our monarchs are going to make it to Mexico, and they're going to hang out there for the wintertime. Now, I always like to joke around that monarchs love the holidays because they started leaving our area at about Labor Day. They'll get there at about somewhere between Halloween and Thanksgiving. They will stay there in Mexico until about Valentine's Day. They will start their migration about Valentine's Day. They'll make it into Texas and those areas. They'll stop. They will reproduce. And at about Easter, see a theme here? About Easter, their babies, their offspring, will continue the journey. This generation that was hatched in August will finally die in February or so, after they've laid their eggs, after they've laid their eggs. Their offspring will continue the journey, and their offspring will get a little bit further up into the United States. They'll stop, they will reproduce, and about Memorial Day, the offspring of theirs will start their migration, continuing on up into New York and the areas like that. So we started off with our monarchs down here in Mexico, right there. they are going to get up into Texas. They'll stop, reproduce. This second generation will then continue on the journey. They will stop and reproduce in somewhere in Tennessee and kind of Kentucky area. And by the way, they're actually spreading all throughout this whole area. That third generation will continue the journey all the way up to New York, where they will stop, reproduce, and then their babies will hang out here for the summer. They'll have another generation, and then this fifth generation here will be the ones that will go all the way back down. So the monarchs that go down to Mexico have never been to Mexico. The monarchs that return back to us have never been to us, have never been to New York. So it's this really amazing thing because, as I said, like birds and whales and other animals, they do these migrations, but they learn. They've done it many, many, many times. Not the monarch. The monarch has never been to Mexico and will never return to Mexico. All right. So now I tell you all these great things. Look at these butterflies. Why should we care? Well, as you guys kind of heard earlier, there's some really important reasons. One is that they're beautiful. They just have this sense of, oh, look at that beautiful butterfly. How pretty is that? And that's really wonderful. But more importantly, they're a pollinator. So what happens is, I was telling you earlier, they land on a flower, they land on that flower, they uncurl that proboscis, that drinking straw, they start to nectar out of that plant. When they're standing on that flower, pollen is getting on their body. They're going to go then take off, fly to another plant, they're going to stop, they'll nectar there, and when they drop onto that plant, they're going to drop some of that pollen, and it's going to actually fertilize the plants. Something along the lines of 60 or 70% of all of our plant food, like things like vegetables and fruits, have been pollinated by pollinators like bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. So they play a very important role in putting food on your table. Another thing is that they're indicator species. Now, Bruce actually said this already, is that they are the canary in the coal mine. If you have a really healthy butterfly population, that's a really good sign that everything is going okay. You can also use them as an indicator by, we know fairly well what butterflies should be in our area. And if something starts to change, we get new butterflies introduced into our area, that's a sign that something is going on. So they're a really good indicator species. And as I said, part of that reason is they are so closely tied to the environment, whether it's through plants or the temperatures that are around. Another thing is that this statement right here. I kind of led this off with this. Bugs, ugh, I hate bugs, ugh, I hate insects, ugh. But look at the butterfly, it's so pretty. It really brings people in, and I can, for me personally, I can use this as a really good method to get people interested in animals and in butterflies and trying to make sure that we preserve a world for them to be able to inhabit. Now, there is a lot of conservation issues that are going on with butterflies. As I said, they are an indicator species, and a lot of that is because they are so closely tied to the environment. The number one conservation issue going on with butterflies is habitat loss. Now, normally when we think about habitat loss, we're thinking about cities or houses or towns being built. And that is true. That's part of what's going on. The fields and the meadows and the other areas where the butterflies could be or normally would be found are being taken up for our use. But that's not the whole story about habitat loss. There's actually a lot of other ways that you can make it so that the butterflies can't survive in that habitat. One is right here is the logging in their overwintering grounds. So the monarchs all go down into Mexico and they all hang out in those trees. Those are 12 very selective spots in Mexico. And unfortunately, those forests are being logged. And a lot of that logging is illegal, but unfortunately, it's also the only thing that is providing money for families or wood for families so that they can build things or have their fires that they're going to need to have. But when we start to take away those spots for them to be overwintering, it's going to make it harder and harder for them to be able to survive. Another thing is pesticides. As we use pesticides, unfortunately, a lot of pesticides are not species specific. You get June bugs or Japanese beetles on your roses, you might put a pesticide down. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that if a butterfly lands on that, it could negatively affect them. That's also especially the case for the caterpillars. caterpillars are actually eating the leaves of plants. And if there's a pesticide on that plant, it will actually kill them off. So that's causing a huge problem for them. And so is herbicides, and including GMOs. The herbicides aren't killing the butterflies in the form of I spray an herbicide on the butterfly or what the butterfly is eating and it gets inside the butterfly's body and it kills the butterfly. What's actually happening is, remember, is that they're eating the plants. If we spray an herbicide into our gardens or into our fields, it's going to kill off, say, the broadleaf plants. Well, a broadleaf plant like milkweed is going to die off. And that's actually also what's happening with the GMOs. We're making these great fields that produce a lot of corn or a lot of other things, but those fields that were in the breadbasket of America, those used to be great milkweed fields as well, because in between those corn rows, milkweed would grow. And that's why, actually a large part of the reason why monarchs were going to those areas, because there was lots of milkweed there. Now, because of GMOs and herbicides, that's actually killing off all that milkweed and it's making it harder for them to survive. So those fields that were once there are no longer there for them. There is also invasive species. Not only are there some butterflies that are coming in, that are creeping in, that aren't quite right for the area, but what's more of a problem with invasive species, there's a plant in our area that was brought in. It's called the black swallowwort. The black swallowwort is very similar to milkweed. It looks very similar, it has the same kind of seed pod, but the thing is I forgot to actually say this earlier, the reason why monarchs use milkweed as that larval host plant is as that monarch caterpillar starts to eat that leaf, milkweed is actually toxic, it's poisonous. But caterpillars, monarch butterfly caterpillars, not only enjoy that toxicity, they store it in their bodies, making the monarch butterfly poisonous. So don't eat a monarch, just saying that. But beyond that, that actually helps protect the monarch butterfly. That's why that monarch butterfly actually has that bright orange color. It's a sign, go ahead and eat me, you're not gonna like it though. But what's happening though is that swallowwort, which is in the very similar to milkweed, swallowwort, which it looks very similar to milkweed. The caterpillar will go and lay the butterfly will lay the egg on that swallowwort plant, and the caterpillar will start to eat that. Well, the toxicity that is found inside the swallowwort is so high it actually kills off the caterpillar. So the monarch female lays her egg thinking this is a great place for my caterpillar to grow, and unfortunately actually kills them off. Another problem is climate change. As we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, it's actually releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide basically creates a heat-trapping blanket, keeping the heat that should be radiated off of the Earth from the sun in against the Earth. It's like throwing layers of a blanket on top of you during the wintertime. Now, the problem with this is that not only does it increase the frequency and intensity of storms, it's also actually increasing the temperature, which is starting to push butterflies out of areas that they would normally be found and moving them into new areas. This is also a huge issue because the mountains in Mexico are a very specific part of that of their range. It's up the mountain far enough that down the mountain far enough that they stay nice and warm, but far enough up the mountain that they're not getting too warm or they're going to be burning through their energy that they stored for through the winter. Now, if we start increasing the temperature, it's going to make it harder and harder for them to survive through the winter without burning all the way through their fat stores. Now, other issues, and that are slightly less, especially now, overcollection. It's especially in the early 1900s, butterflies were just sought after because of their beauty. So lots of butterflies were taken out of the environment for collection, both for study, but also for, look how pretty this butterfly is up on my wall. And that's caused a lot of problems for butterflies. And so has disease. I like that little picture. There's a couple of different diseases that butterflies can carry that they will only pass to one another that is hurting them. There's one that's called OE. It's called OE because nobody knows how to pronounce it correctly, and I'm not even going to try. And that disease actually kills off monarch butterflies. That's one of the ones that's really causing a lot of problems for them. Now, just to kind of give you an example of how bad things have become, in the last 20 years, there has been a huge decrease in monarch butterfly population. What happens when they get down to Mexico, scientists can actually study how many are down there by measuring the area that they're found in. So basically they get up in a helicopter or a plane and they can take photos, and then they can end up measuring how much area the butterflies cover. Well, back in 1996, 1997, they had 20.97 hectares of land, which is, if I remember correctly, about 60 acres, give or take. Last year, they only found monarchs in 0.67, which is a hair over 1.5 acres or so. If you've been to the Seneca Park Zoo and you know how big the zoo is, you can fit 9 overwintering sites at that size on the zoo grounds. That's a very small amount of space. And this just shows you how much the population of the monarch butterfly has declined over the last 20 years. So I don't want you guys to be like, oh, it's all is lost, because it's not all lost. We can do a lot. One is we can plant gardens. We can plant habitat. We can make it a better environment for our butterflies. We can also make sure that we don't use herbicides or pesticides. There are ways that we can actually manage pests and some bad plants without spraying them. We can encourage others to use less energy, and we can encourage others to use less energy and be more efficient. And we can bulk up the population. And that's actually one of the fun things that I get to do on our Butterfly Beltway program, and we can actually release monarch butterflies into the wild. So actually talking about the Butterfly Beltway program, we started in 2002 with 5 gardens. We really focused on seniors and special needs sites. We had a very generous donation and a grant written by the Daisy Marquis Jones Foundation. Here in 2014, we're at almost 140 sites, and we're all over Western New York. We're at schools and libraries and preschools and senior centers, special needs centers, anywhere that has space where they would like to preserve monarch butterflies. And that's actually just a map. We have monarch butterfly. We have gardens in Buffalo. We have them out in Seneca Falls. We have them in Hornell and Bath, and actually I'll be planting one in Painted Post, which is somewhere right around here, next year. But we have a lot of gardens all over the place, and that's helping bring up the population, the habitat for our butterflies. So just any quick questions right now? I know we're going to do some more questions later on, but do you guys have anything where you're like, all right, Tim, this has been bugging me? Anything?
So you've taken care of half the problem, if you will, by having more habitats here. But what about the other end?
That's a really good question. So the question was, that we're working on half the problem. We're working on half the problem by creating more habitat for butterflies to survive in our area. But what about down in Mexico? There's actually a couple of different organizations, including the Monarch Butterfly Fund, which is basically collecting resources to provide to the people in Mexico to help protect those areas and also give them something else to do other than log those the forests that are there. So that's definitely part of it. There's a lot of other organizations that are trying to do more with preserving what is there, and of course trying to reintroduce habitat down there. But unfortunately, that's not something I do. I really wish I could do, though. Anything else? Yeah?
How can you tell the difference? How can you tell the difference between a swallowtail and the milkweed?
Oh, the black swallowwort and the milkweed. I can, by looking at the leaves, that's one way that you can tell. There's a different leaf pattern for us to be able to easily identify it. A lot of times also, the black swallowwort comes up as a vine, whereas the milkweed plants are definitely not vine. So, but I wish I had a picture of swallowwort, but you'd see that the leaves are in a different arrangement than what milkweed would be. Yeah, the flowers. The flowers are definitely different. The flowers for swallowwort look like a black little star, whereas milkweed has a bigger, a milkweed flower. Well, if you think of more questions, we'll be able to do more questions at the end of this. Plus, also I'll be hanging around, and I'll have some actually information that If you would like to sign up and find out more about the monarch butterfly or any other butterflies or the Butterfly Beltway program, you can give me your email and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Or if you're interested in having a Butterfly Beltway garden at your home, because we do that, or if you'd like to sponsor a garden at your church or your school or something, we can certainly do that as well. I'll also have my business cards, so you can come up and ask me at the end of that. But thank you very much for your time.
So Tim talked a lot about what you need. So some of this may seem a little redundant, but I've got some pictures here as well. And on your lists, you've got a list of more plants than you'll probably ever want to buy or plant. But at least you have a good sense of some of the plants you can use to attract butterflies and later on bees and birds into your garden. Obviously, good nectar sources in the sun. Butterflies like to hang out in the sunlight. And they'll pretty much generally only feed in the sun. And Tim, if anything I'm saying is wrong, I want you to yell at me, okay? So when I'm designing gardens for clients, I love the concept of designing meadows. Now, some people call meadows weeds. You'll see an empty lot along the side of the road. And this time of the year, it's so beautiful because you see the masses of asters and you see the red twig dogwood when they're losing their leaves and you see the red. And a lot of people say it's a weedy meadow. It's a weedy lot, but it's not really. So when I'm designing a meadow garden for a client, I'm trying to emulate that native meadow that you see in our area of the world. Both these gardens are residential gardens. The one over here on the left is off of a backyard of a client. This was a forever wild area beyond it. We only took about 10 feet of it, but we made our meadow look like it blended into the rest of the environment. But you see stuff like daisies, coneflowers, Russian sages, other things like that attract the butterflies, the birds, the bees, things like that. Here on the right is literally a garden that's maybe 30 by 40. We just took the lawn out and put a garden in for the client. And she was a very eclectic client, so we were able to do a very eclectic garden and basically just inundate the house with things like native coneflower. That's a native Rudbeckia coneflower. There are butterfly weed in there. There's all sorts of different just native and adapted, because bringing in invasive species is not what we want to do. We don't want to plant lithorum. We don't want to plant plants like that. We don't want to plant Japanese knotweed. But I will use adapted plants. My favorite plant in the world, if any of you know me, is a stilbe. It's not a native plant, but it's also not an invasive plant. So we use stuff like that as well in our gardens. But if I can use native plants like the native Rudbeckias and things like that, I'll use them. And the one thing about native plants is you know they're going to live. You know they're going to live in our area with minimal care. I am really big into eliminating lawns. I have a whole talk on the lawn-free landscape. This is a residential site in Victor, and all the neighbors thought, what are these people doing? But we tore out the whole front lawn and turned it into a front meadow. This is the walkway going to the front door. For me, there's nothing nicer than walking down that walkway of daisies on both sides. But this is also a habitat for butterflies. We're talking about butterflies, so I'll say butterflies first. But bees, hummingbirds, birds, snakes, you name it, they live in there. And that, to me, is awesome. Some people don't like snakes, but I think they're kind of cool. So you could see it in different times of the year. In midsummer, then later on in the season, we have things like catnip, nepeta, daisies, coneflowers, astilbes, black-eyed Susans. Tim talked about giving them a place for puddling. I've always known it as taking rocks with little, we call them rain dimples. You find a rock with a little depression and water will sit in it after a rainstorm, and you'll see the butterflies flitting in and out of it. I did not know about eating the mud, though. That's pretty cool. But same kind of concept. So we'll do things like, whether it's just a little low-level bird bath, or it's a place where water can puddle on a rock. You'll see the butterflies congregating. A place to rest. Again, Tim was talking about this. I love this picture of this butterfly just hanging out on that rock. And I kind of like that guy too, by the way. But yeah, places for them just to kind of sit and sun themselves and live. They like to sit and read a book or whatever they're doing at the time. So we'll do a lot of things where we'll do some boulder work, or I'll do a lot of stone work. I love the idea, no matter what type of stone work I'm doing, what type of paving or steps, I love the idea of having some naturalistic boulders and features like that, where I can tuck plants into nooks and crannies. So yeah, give the butterfly, the caterpillars a place to eat. And you know, that's one of the big things you see in all the pesticide things. And native plants are pretty important. Tim, you know, touched on the fact that where butterflies go and how just instinctually they come back here, and instinctually they land in Tennessee. You know, they go to Nashville for a concert, and then they go watch then they go land on a milkweed there. But native plants are important. That's a milkweed flower right there, native aster, and even thistles and things like that. These are all native plants. Tim talked about having blooming throughout the season, and here's a good example where you can start early. Everybody know what spice bush is? Lindera. Spice bush flowers in April. Beautiful native plant, awesome plant. So you've got early spring, you've got things like azaleas in the spring, moving into late spring, early summer. Then you start going into summer sweet, and you can go into things like butterfly bush, asters, things like that, goldenrods. So here are 4 plants, and there is your season of plants right there, to be able to have things go from spring to fall. As far as I know, they're attracted to very bright colors. So you can see things like, this is paprika yarrow. We're all used to seeing the yellow yarrows native in the fields. There are some beautiful colored yarrows out there. There's pinks and terracottas, and this one's called paprika. This is a bright coneflower. New York ironweed grows like 7 or 8 feet tall, deep purple flower on the top late in the season. Really cool plant. And then bee balm is another one that will also bring in your bees. As much as we can avoid insecticides, we will avoid insecticides. So what I just did a few slides, some of the more common butterflies, just to show you some different plants that you can use to bring in some of these butterflies and caterpillars. So here's the caterpillar phase, the butterfly phase, obviously. Thistle, native thistles, they grow wild in our fields here. They're everywhere. Daisies, asters, goldenrod. Goldenrod is not the plant that gives you hay fever. And there are actually goldenrods that are cultivated for sale for gardens. Look at that caterpillar. That would scare the heck out of me if I walked past that. But really cool. Hackberries, some trees, they'll be attracted to trees. So this is a hackberry tree. And then again, asters and summer sweets. Summer sweet's a great plant, and there are some native summer sweets, but there are also some dwarf. Native summer sweets will grow 8 feet, which is okay if you have the room for them to grow. But there are also dwarfs, one called Hummingbird. It's a little white one that grows 3 to 4 feet. And the name Hummingbird means something. So it's a great plant to have. In 2012, we did a project at the corner of Jay and Child Streets, and Ron and Trey, the 2 brothers, were my 2 buddies. These guys worked side by side with me for 2 weeks. Every day they were out there carrying brick, planting plants, spreading mulch, doing everything. So they got the honor of doing the Monarch release. And we had a big group, and we brought in the Seneca Park Zoo, and they bring in the little basket of butterflies, and we did butterfly releases, and it was really, really cool. And the picture's a little tough to see because it's a little light in here, but right on Trey's hand right here, and then you can see right here, one of the butterflies flying away right there. And it's very cool. And we do a lot. There's a lot of events going on in these, so we try to have, like we've had movie nights. Food Link had a tent set up at the Jay and Child site for a year. Hummingbirds are really, everybody's seen a hummingbird, right? And when you see a hummingbird, it's a super cool thing. And you can bring in hummingbirds with a lot of very common plants. So things like Agastache, which is a really nice plant. Now you have to be careful. Some Agastaches can be very prolific. And that's just a generous term of saying they can get a little crazy. So you have to keep them under control. But there are a number of cultivated Agastaches that will bring in hummingbirds. And it's a pretty cool bird to see. Columbines, we have native columbines here. There's also Rocky Mountain columbine, which will grow around here. But there are a lot of native columbines that will grow in New York State, and you can bring in hummingbirds with those as well. This is another plant that I think is really underused. Red hot poker and Kniphofia. A lot of different colors. The common one you see is pretty much the orangey looking ones, but there's also a really cool yellow one. My only knock on Kniphofia is they don't flower very long. Bee balm, There is the bee balm that goes crazy, and there are some bee balms that don't go crazy. Typically, the common red one that you see out and about a lot that gets the mildew on it, that's kind of the one that goes crazy. But there is a pink version and a purplish version. I can't tell you the exact name of it, but they're a lot more well-behaved, and they're a dwarf, because typical bee balms will grow 3 to 4 feet. They get a little crazy, but there's some dwarfs, 18, 24 inch. Pen stem is another one. You don't really see a whole lot used out there in garden design. Both the perennial salvias, the true salvia, which what I call the true salvias, the perennial ones, the sages, and the annual ones, like that you can buy at the garden center in May and plant out in your garden, both of those will bring in hummingbirds, amongst other things. Very common plants, all somewhat native or adapted, you can plant, and you'll bring in the cardinals. Plants that I found in my research, obviously, serviceberry is one of the best plants. Native Amelanchier, shadblow, juneberry, it's all the same thing. And if you know what a serviceberry is, the little purplish fruits that they get that look like blueberries are great. So if the birds don't get them, you can eat them, throw them on your cereal, make jam, that kind of thing. But obviously the birds love them too. So you're going to see serviceberry in almost every plant list for almost bringing in almost any bird in our area. You're going to see serviceberry because they love them. And so do the squirrels too. Think about evergreens. A lot of birds will either nest in some of these plants or they'll use the material to create their nests. The birds, they do like to have a place where they can kind of hide, go get their food and come back. So plants like cedars and things like that. Our native cedar on this side of the country is a juniper. That if you let them grow, if you go up to the Adirondacks, you see them everywhere. Big trunks, beautiful exfoliating bark trunks, beautiful plants. Bluebirds, we have bluebird boxes out in our front field. I think you point it north, I think is the way you point the opening to the house, and you will get bluebirds. But they also do like all different types of native plant, sumacs, and high bush cranberry is a viburnum. It can be a European cranberry. And sour gum, which is a native tree here too. Nyssa, black tupelo, those are all the same tree. But they do like evergreens, and they do like beauty plants and structures to bring in some of the bees, like the mason bees and the bumblebees, to help us keep pollinating. 33% of our food is pollinated by bees. So if the bees go away, a lot of our agriculture, and they'll find other ways to do it, but it's going to be, through maybe things that aren't so natural. But 90% of plants are cross-pollinated, and I did discover that in California, almonds are exclusively dependent on honeybees to pollinate them. And there are other issues going on in California also with this drop in the bee population. So as much as they can be, they can be a pest at times, they're less of a pest. Their goods outweigh their bads, and we should be doing what we can to keep them around. Colony collapse disorder is what I meant to say. Since from 2006, 2011, the bee population has gone down 33% per year. That's pretty significant. So, you're talking about people who are managing honeybees. I have a client out in Sodas. She has a little honeybee farm. I went to go meet with her one day, and she has a little area, and she makes honey, and she sells it at the public market and other places. But those managed hives are half of what they were 60 or 70 years ago. And that's not really a good thing for our agricultural health. Pesticides are probably the single biggest reason. Now, there's been a lot of questions, what's really killing them off, but certainly we're helping. It's sort of like the whole debate on climate change, and I am not going to get into that political debate at all. But even if one side who says there's no way that anything's changing, there is no question that things are changing in some way. And there is no question that we're helping it along with some of our silliness. I know we all want to eat those apples with no little bug holes in them. And, we want our beautiful tangerines from Florida and our bananas from Belize. And we don't want any bugs or any little rot spots in them. So this is the kind of stuff that's going on. But it's also helping to create other issues. And we want to be careful with that kind of stuff. I discovered that a lot of it is due to non-native plants being planted. The bees aren't pollinating them, or they're not liking them. And I am not a native plant Nazi. I know I have a lot of clients on a questionnaire we give them. We ask them if they want to use native plants, and if so, exclusively or not exclusively. I'm not going to judge. If someone wants only native plants, I'll make it happen for them. But I don't think that there's always a bad thing if we use some non-native plants. But if we start really introducing a lot of craziness in here, and with the climate changing, you see some of the stuff that's going on. You know, kudzu is up here now. I mean, it was never up here. It was a southern menace that was brought over from, I believe, Japan. But it was a southern menace. Now it's starting to work its way north. So a lot of these non-natives are creating issues. Obviously, development is too. Now, in Rochester, in this area, we don't have the crazy development that they have in a lot of other big towns. Where I came from on Long Island, I mean, every square inch. You know, unless some activist stops the site from being developed, they're going to develop it. Here, we have a lot more open space. But development still certainly does take its toll. As Tim talked about too, diseases and pathogens, in some cases, we don't know. And they're still trying to figure it out. What's killing them off? This is a great shot. This is a beak covered with pollen. Tim was talking about how the butterflies pick up the pollen when they're doing other things. This is pretty typical. I love watching bees in the garden and watch them flit from one flower to the next, and they're covered in pollen from one flower. That's how they're cross-pollinating our plants. So again, native plants. Aster. This is mullein. You see this growing on the side of the road. It'll grow in concrete. It's incredible. Really cool plant. Big lamb's ear, like fluffy leaves with a big, tall yellow stalk late in the season. Native black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia. Here's a yarrow. These are the plants that bees like. They like color. This is the other butterfly. This is actual what we call butterfly milkweed. It's Asclepias. And this is the one we use mostly for ornamentals. It's more of the cultivated milkweed, one of the ones that Tim was talking about of the three. This is the cultivated one that we use quite a bit in our garden design. Coreopsis, cardinal flowers. This is another native black-eyed Susan called Henry Eiler's black-eyed Susan. Grows this tall. Really dramatic plant. And we plant in mass. Bees like to hang out around a lot of flowers. So we'll do masses of plantings. Now, it's not absolutely necessary. Looks kind of cool, though. The bottom line is these guys come into our gardens and eat our plants that we spend a lot of money planting. So what do? We can hunt. I'm not a hunter. The way I recommend to my clients is we discourage. We try to plant things that they won't eat. Now, deer, in particular, don't read books. They don't know what they're supposed to eat, what they're not supposed to eat. I have lists. I've got multiple lists next to my drafting table. Everywhere from 0, like boxwood, Pieris, all the way up to 100, hosta, rhododendron, things like that. So we talk about installing animal-resistant plants. Now, in general, most of these animals will not eat anything that's got a heavy fragrance or a texture. Hence, things like lamb's ear, you don't really see them eating. You don't see them eating lavender. This is a great perennial geranium called Biocovo geranium. Plant this plant. That is an awesome perennial ground cover. Great, great plant. Biocovo, Biokovo, geranium. And again, I was talking earlier about salvias, what I consider a real salvia versus a fake salvia. When you buy geraniums at the garden center for summer, that's a pelargonium. True geraniums are perennials. And this is one of them. There are a number of varieties. Roseanne's probably the best of the bunch. But this Biocovo is a really great one. And it's heavily fragrant. Even when there's no flower on it, it only flowers for 2 or 3 weeks. I don't even care about the flower, to be honest with you. When it's just a carpet of texture, it's beautiful. And then when it rains, the fragrance comes out of it. Or you walk by and you scuff it. And I go to clients' houses all the time. And whenever I see I have it there, I kind of walk by and do this as I'm walking past it, just to pull the fragrance out of it. But typically, the animals will not eat stuff that's heavily fragrant or heavily textured. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a big-time dog lover. So I do tell people, just get a dog. Let it run around the yard. That'll keep the animals away. But you can do things like deer fencing. The sprays, some of them work, some of them don't. Fertilizer called Milorganite that you can buy at Country Max. It smells like poop because that's what it is. And it's a fertilizer, but it also has a heavy fragrance, and it does tend to keep them away. The thing about deer, beyond the other ones, deer tend to be creatures of habit. So if you can kind of keep them in this direction, they'll typically stay in that direction. But if they discover your beautiful hostas and ewes, well, you know, you're going to have to cover them or spray them continuously. And the sprays, I have thousands of clients over the years, so I've been through this a lot with clients. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. We can learn to coexist. I love that picture. But, you know, that means planting things that they typically won't eat, or living with some of the things that they do eat. We are big proponents, as you can probably tell, of being just a good citizen of the earth. If you want deer, or maybe you don't, and you want bees and birds, and since we're focusing on butterflies here, right, Tim? We need to do the right thing. Keep the pesticides to a minimum, keep the herbicides to a minimum, plant the plants that will draw these guys in, and just, you know, go out there and learn to coexist with them. Questions, comments, opinions? Phyllis is running around with the mic. Sing for us, Phyllis.
I think, from my opinion, I think the challenge is really big, really key, is how do we persuade Americans to get rid of their front lawns? It started in the 1950s, and they spend an obsessive amount of time looking after them, spending money on it. But the reality is, as you mentioned, a meadow is so much more attractive, and the insect load and the animal load is incredible.
There's no question.
Yeah.
Yeah, lawns, like I said, I have a talk I do on the lawn-free landscape. So I did a lot of research on how lawns came to America. And you're right. A lot of lawns, they started in France and England.
Yeah.
And actually in Holland, too. But then when people first came over to the United States, all they cared about was growing food. They needed to live. So the early colonists, you know, lawns didn't matter. But when they started making money, or the aristocrats started coming over, a lawn was a sign of wealth. And this is the mindset. It's a sign of prosperity and wealth. And you know, I'm one to admit, you know, freshly mown lawn looks kind of nice. But I did this talk, the lawn-free landscape talk, for 600 people at a conference of landscapers in Columbus, Ohio, 3 or 4 years ago. And I had one guy that sent that survey back in. He hated my guts. How dare I insult lawn mowing and blowers and all of that stuff. But I've got statistics on how much it costs to mow a lawn, how much gasoline waste, pollution, the comparison to cars and trucks, how much comes out of these lawnmowers, and in particular, any kind of type of two-cycle blower. Two-cycle motors like chainsaws, they are highly pollutant tools. So how do we convince them?
Yeah,
I just keep trying. Someday someone's going to throw a rock at me and it'll be all done. But it's true. It's just we are obsessed with lawns in this country.
And they are so sterile for everything. And the other thing, and this is actually now starting to happen in England, the government is actually paying farmers to leave 20 feet of cultivated fields unplanted and just have wildflowers there.
That's great.
And that's driving up the bee population and the butterfly population. And you know, there's the other thing, because we've lost all the hedgerows.
Yeah.
And that's where you can find all this wildlife. And then
That's
the
right.
monarchs will start to come back because they are carrying, you know, the milkwood.
I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
I'm
How we
totally
achieve
with
it.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How do you control your meadows? I mean, do you mow them once a year?
Yeah, I do recommend people mow. Like our meadow at our shop, we mow once a year. In some areas, and Tony can probably expound on this too a little bit, you know, the proper way to really control a meadow is to do a controlled burn. But I don't think we get the permission to do that in these towns around here. But if you go out west, where there's a little more wide open space, people will literally burn the meadows. And that's what really helps to propagate and like the grasses and things to poke back up. But around here, like my own meadow at the shop, we'll mow it. As soon as the ground freezes, we mow it. Or if we get lazy, we'll wait until early spring, and then we'll mow it down. We do try to leave some stuff up, like thistles and things for the birds. So if I have thistles or coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, the little Niger seed pods on them, we'll leave those up for the birds for the winter.
And actually, something that I would suggest with mowing, if you can do it, so there's something called successional mowing. Basically, it's like dividing your area into like 3 or 4 or whatever, and then just mow one certain section, and then do that year after year, so that there's always a kind of almost an overgrown area, an area that's kind of in between, and then a freshly mowed area, just because then that actually brings in a lot of different varieties. You have things that, so you have like bushier plants that will provide more habitat or more shelter for animals, and then you have ones that are fresh. So like a lot of like for the skippers that I was talking about, they love the grasses. They love this, like the sedges and the grasses. So it actually will increase the biodiversity of bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, everything into your area by doing something like that. So if you do it every 3 years, you make a couple of strips down your meadow. There's actually a couple of really good studies about where that is actually very helpful for increasing the biodiversity.
Very cool. So maybe if I forget to mow my meadow, I'm doing pretty good?
Yeah, this is
No, it's good.
or
I
just get
agree.
lazy and only do half of it, and then do the other later.
Pretty soon you'll have a forest, you know.
Well, yeah, what I noticed coming up in our meadow, if areas we don't hit, are the cottonwoods. They come up pretty quickly. The willows come up pretty quickly. But if we hit them, and we do it, what Tim says makes a lot of sense. I mean, there are a couple of seasons where we didn't mow it, and then we just kind of start hitting it again in the spring. One of my employees likes to mow, and I have to kind of put the brakes on him because he's one of those guys who loves the look of that mown. So like we have a path. We mowed a path through the field so we can walk, and we can walk our dog, because our dog comes to the office. So we have an area where we can walk Nellie through, and if I'm in a bad mood, I can go walk the estate, I call it. And I'll go out there and I'll go, wow, he mowed that spot down. So I have to stop mowing. But yes, I agree with that. Letting some stuff stay up like that is true. Tim is right. Good? Happy? Was this good? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.